Hello, welcome to Outside In. This is a new video series that we are doing to provide support, commentary, advice, anything of benefit to people who are incarcerated based on our experience spending a significant amount of time in prison in Wisconsin. And this will be a monthly video series that we're going to do. We will have different topics. We'll go through some of that as we go through this first episode to identify things we're thinking about, things we for sure will do, and that we want to get insight and advice from viewers and anyone about what topics to cover going forward. So just check in on whatever the virtual platform that you might be observing this on right now is regularly to see about new episodes. Like I said, it'll be a monthly. If we shift that at any time, we will make that known to if it's going to be more common or less common in the cadence. But for now, it's going to introduce ourselves, talk a little bit about what we're looking to accomplish again about this, the mission, and then we're going to get into some more commentary, just a back and forth conversation between me and Randy about our time aside, what we're looking to achieve with this platform and this video series, and just kind of talk through any things that we think right now are really valuable to people who are incarcerated based on what we have seen in the time that we've been free, and kind of what we wish we had known when we were still inside that we've learned and maybe could have made that path easier. So before we get into it, pass it over to Randy to introduce himself and talk a bit more about what the platform is and the show, and then I'll come back and introduce myself, and then we'll get into a conversation.
All right, thank you, Shannon. So my name is Randy Forsterling, and the whole reason for having this is to actually be able to not just inspire and inform, people that are on the inside and also people on the outside of how we can bridge success through, people that are out on the outside that have been successful and that are navigating the free world to, how that, can be brought into the inside. We really want to be able to, offer opportunities, bring people the resources that they need, getting them connected. As Shannon said, there are things that we learn after the fact that we wish we would have known or, prepared ourselves better. And that's something that we hope to provide. We want to be a constant in your lives. I know it's easy to get sidetracked. There's always things going on, but we don't want to talk at you. We want to actually walk this journey with you. And we want to make sure that in this mission, that we're bringing people to the table, because that's what we're going to end up doing. It's going to be like roundtable discussions, one conversation at a time, where we'll talk about different topics, and whether it's relationships, financial stuff, there's a lot of, there should be that goal in mind that if you are going to be getting out of prison, and we know that the majority of people that go to prison and jail do eventually get released, being financially stable is a big factor. Learning the process, like there is a different process for each person, but there is a process that, you can learn from in real time. And there will be people on the show that may have just gotten out. Shannon and I have been out for a few years. I'll be going on 3 years shortly in August. And, there's people that I've spoke to recently that had did, 20, 30, 40 plus years in prison that are in programs, and they've only been out, a month or two. So navigating things for them is a little bit different, but knowing what to prepare for. A lot of times there's going to be, things that come up, technology. That's one of the benefits of this is I seen an opportunity. We did a video, to address commutations. We got it approved. We got a lot of great feedback. Guys were really thankful. Hey, this is helping men and women on the inside, but it's also helping their families out here. It's helping organizations, get people connected. And that's what's important, is making sure that your needs are being addressed. And hopefully, as this evolves, we'll hear more from you guys as what you want to hear about, but also we kind of know from our experiences and the experience of other people that have been successful, continue to be successful, what it really takes. And hopefully, whether it's monthly or we end up doing it more often or less, there are opportunities for you guys to take advantage of. There's a lot of programs that no longer exist in the system that were able to benefit myself. I don't know what Shannon all did, but there were good programs, there were good facilitators. It wasn't, all bad. Obviously prison sucks, but it does have its benefits. And we hope to, open your eyes to, what that may be. And being out here, we obviously have the benefit of reaching out to pretty much every institution, not just here in Wisconsin, but around the world. And I have looked at, how things are being done in other states, other countries, and where we can improve. And right now, we hope to take advantage of this opportunity virtually. So hopefully, in the near future, we'll have a roundtable discussion and we'll have a topic that will kick things off and be able to help everybody out and move forward, with the right step.
And go a little intro to myself that might be useful to start is there's an organization called The Community that you, I'm sure, know about because this video is probably attached to some account that's connected to the organization. And it's also on the background little logo. And when I was incarcerated in 2014, it was just a newsletter that I started writing in Stanley, Wisconsin, and then over time, over the 6 years before I came home, and then now coming up on 6 years that I've been home, just kept growing it, and it's became larger than just a newsletter. A lot of national existence, different programs we have in prisons, and a lot of narrative work that we do as well. So in that time, I've definitely lived a variety of experiences and probably lifetimes and mistakes since I've been home that I hope can be of value to talk about to someone who is on the way to have the same journey to avoid the stumbles that I had. And if nothing else, just be aware of the kind of things that people have concerns about, to consider if the path you are planning on taking is viable for you still, and if genuinely you are as ready as you think, and if you have all of the same type of mental understanding and stability that is necessary to meet the sea of freedom when it hits you upon release. And we're going to talk about a lot of different things and go into that and just explain it more, of course, the details. There's a whole lot there that maybe I'll talk about that may not be of use to you or of interest, but there are areas that maybe would be that you can highlight and we can discuss at some point. But just definitely want to make sure that you are aware of how many folks like me and Randy are out here doing well, that you maybe don't see a lot in the news, you don't see in the papers, you don't get from people who are staff that oftentimes also don't realize how many people are making it and successful. So we just want to expose you to a greater understanding of what's possible and what is happening and what's been happening for a long time, like we discovered when we came home, to change that narrative, correct that narrative in your own mind about what's possible. In addition to that, I got out and I was able to get my graduate degree in sustainable peace building at Marquette University. At UWM. I work at Marquette now as a consultant for their consortium work that they do to provide higher education degrees for people who are incarcerated and post-incarceration. And I have a 4-year-old son going on 5 named Cairo, and I have been a fellow of a couple programs across the country for different things. So been able to get a good lens on what's happening across the country. And last thing I guess I'll say is I've stumbled my way into now having visited 8 different countries in the past 2.5 years to see the work that's going on across the world as well. So I think I have a pretty decent lens to offer some value and to answer some questions that may come up for people who are inside and just people who are curious about the criminal legal system in general. Yeah. Anything else you think you want to touch on before we go into the conversation part?
Well, yeah, and that's another thing that's important is that a lot of people do see us being successful, but there's also that part that we do stumble. There are things that come up. Life, you never know what's going to come up, and we have to make a choice. Just like when we were in, yeah, we still get upset with things. You might even get mad. But learning how to channel those energies and making sure that you're making the right choices and that you have the right values, and you're not just giving up because you stumble. That's part of life. You're gonna run into things, and if you want to be successful, that's just part of the journey. I think it's important too to understand that for me, I'm a community advocate, and a lot of times people ask, well, what does that actually mean? And it's well, you have the prison community, and then you have civilian community out here, and it's I work with victims of crime, survivors of crime, and I also work with people that are incarcerated. It's kind of juggling that. I've been to court hearings for both sides, and there's, a lot of juggling going on, but that's something that I chose to do. I've become friends with a lot of different people in the professional world as well, and for me, I enjoy that. I know sometimes it can be frustrating for others, You know, when I was in, you know, there's people that watched me go through that process of, you know, litigating my way out. And could I become a lawyer? Yeah, I could go and, you know, achieve that, but that's not my goal. That wasn't my goal. I don't charge, you know, for what I do. And the reason really is because I know so many people are taken advantage of. And yeah, you have good attorneys out there, but there's just so much going on where it's like, I don't want to be a part of that. And I don't have to have a law license in order to help people out, you know, and I like having the freedoms. And Shannon gave me an opportunity. You know, he asked me to write, you know, a legal column for the newsletter, and I was like, well, I have more to offer than just that, you know. So I created the gist and I started writing that. And for me, it's a way to kind of mentor and continue the mentorship that I provided while I was in, you know. And a lot of guys, you know, for me, it's exciting to watch them, you know, grow. You know, I didn't get that opportunity to watch myself grow, obviously, you know, because you're so busy, you know, going through the motions. And, you know, now I get to help guys come home, and, you know, it's amazing to see, you know, some of the guys that I've known for 20, 30 plus years, where they started, especially, you know, a lot of them were kids, you know, and they had to grow up in the adult prison system, and now they're out and they have kids of their own. And, you know, we want that for everybody to be able to achieve whatever success they want. You know, maybe you don't want kids or whatever, or maybe you have kids and you want to have a you know, healthy relationship with them, you know. And hopefully that we'll have people on the show, and that will be something that can help out. Because I remember, you know, I signed up for it was actually a parenting program, and my cellmate was in there, and he's like, just sign up for it. And I was like, all right, I'll sign up for it. And it was actually very beneficial, because it wasn't just the relationship between you and a child. It was your relationship between you and your parents, you know, and grandparents and aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews. And, you know, that actually carried over after I got out, you know. So there may be things that we talk about, like Shannon said, that you're not interested in, or you think you're not interested in, and you become interested in it. You know, I would have never thought, you know, 25 years ago that I would have, you know, achieved authorship while I was in prison. You know, did I know that I could write? Yeah, I enjoy writing, you know, but that just wasn't in the plan. And then it happened. You know, I became really good friends, you know, with my publisher, and you just never know who you're going to meet in, you know, along that journey. And this is an opportunity. Hopefully you'll get to meet a lot of amazing people, and we'll be the ones being able to bridge that, you know, the outside in. And hopefully, you know, it's not just taken for granted either. You know, there's a lot of times where something like this is offered, and then all of a sudden it's not, you know. So obviously we want to evolve this and continue it, you know, but a lot of it depends on you guys on the inside too, you know. So
definitely. Well, we got some questions here to kind of go through and ask each other and see what our different experiences and thoughts were, to kind of start the flow of viewers' minds about what this is and how it can be useful to them. And again, like, definitely share any information that you want us to look into, and then we'll go over later about like other types of guests that we have and other topics that we're looking at. So I'm gonna ask you a question, and then I'll answer it, and then if you want to, you can just ask me a question or just naturally go back and forth. There's no like flow here, so just we're creating this as we go.
Yeah, this is an introductory episode, and that's, you know.
So something that I've definitely thought about a lot, I know I've been asked before, is what do you wish someone would have told you when you were inside that you learned after release?
Well, so, and I've thought about that, and I've actually written to myself, you know, like my younger self, like as I was older, because when I first got locked up, I was 16, and I didn't get it the first time. It took me, you know, going back and forth. I went to prison 3 times, and the last time I spent almost 23 years incarcerated. And, you know, I wish somebody would have actually, and it's not that they didn't, because, you know, my dad stressed it a lot. You know, one of these times you're going to get yourself in so much trouble that we're not going to be able to bail you out or help you out, you know. But I wish somebody would have actually sat me down and said, you know, there's a pattern here, and you have an opportunity to break that right now. And if you don't, you're going to go to prison possibly for the rest of your life. And it's not a matter of, you could go, but this is really going to happen. And if you're not willing to accept that and you're not willing to accept what comes with that, you're going to lose your parents. I lost both my parents to cancer when I was incarcerated. You know, both my grandmas passed away. You know, I lost a lot of close friends, you know, to all different, I mean, gun violence, you name it. And that wasn't really talked about. It was, you're going to lose your freedom.
Yeah.
That was the main thing that my parents would stress. Like, you don't hear about all the people that are not going to be there when you get out. You just assume that they're always going to be there because they've always been there. And at least in my situation, you know, I grew up with both my parents under the same roof, and I understand, you know, not everybody was as fortunate, you know, so I just got used to them being in my life. And then when they weren't there, it was like, okay, now you're on your own. I mean, I did have, you know, my brother and, you know, family that was still around, but it's not the same, you know. And the other part of that was those choices that I made, you know, wanting to live that street life. Nobody said it was going to result in, you know, stripping myself of my own humanity. And I think for me, that was probably one of the hardest things to accept, because it's like, once you realize basically what you've done to yourself, it's like, now you basically deprived all your loved ones, your friends, your family, and yourself of a lot of memories, you know, human experiences that you're not going to get back, you know. And when I lost my mother, I wasn't even able to shed a physical tear, you know, and that bothered me so much. That was my turning point. And I realized in that moment, being in a Supermax at 25 years old, you know, I had a choice. That was going to be my rock bottom. And could it get worse? It could. I could have made choices that would have made my situation worse. But I promised my mom that, you know, I was going to do something with my experience, you know, and turn a negative into a positive.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what my victims wanted as well. And I didn't think that was asking much. But, you know, when you're younger, you don't understand all that, because your mind can't grasp. You know, you're living in little moments, you know, maybe 10 minutes at a time. And to sit there and have to think about this, being stuck in a Supermax prison cell, it's like you can't see the outside world. You're forced to look at yourself in the mirror, and you're stuck looking at the ugly truth. And, you know, yeah, I've written about it, but I lived that. You know, so if somebody would have actually been able to paint that picture for me, maybe I would have made better choices. Maybe not. But it was never painted that way. It was just, you're going to lose your freedom.
Yeah. I think when I think about that, I think of things that I've run into since I've been home that I could have been better prepared for had I had a heads up, or had I known some information. I know one that we'll have a whole show about is about relationships, and how complicated that is when you have been inside for like your entire adult period of your life. Like, I locked up when I was 19, came home at 36. So things that ideally a person would have learned at the age of like 22 or 25, although I know 50-year-olds that seem to keep learning the same lessons. So I'm not too down on myself after I see the totality of ages that are still experiencing things that you would think they learned. But it definitely are just like these relationship balancing muscles that you kind of acquire early on, that I made a lot of mistakes when I came home in that room. And that colored a lot of the first several years of my life in terms of like a lot of the stress and the harm that I was experiencing, causing, just trying to, you know, figure out a lot of things regarding that dynamic between men and women. And so that was the one that really stood out for me a lot when I came home, that I was really shocked by how off I was in my understanding of it. The other one, there's a couple, but I think I'm just kind of highlighting some that really stand out as big, was that I was fortunate when I came home I got out and I took off just like right away, hit the ground running, as they say. And that's a dangerous thing to do. It's not the best practices at all. You know, everyone's situation is different. But I was fortunate to have enough good people, places, and things that I was around and putting myself in, that when I did stumble, it wasn't like detrimental. And there were times, for sure, early years, that I was doing stuff that was, you know, not, I mean, I wasn't like out here committing crimes, but I was doing stuff that could have easily got me in trouble with my agent, stuff that was violations for sure, just as I'm like trying to figure some things out. Some things were like maybe I didn't realize it was a violation. Some things were areas where I was that close to maybe something happening, just like situations to put myself in I shouldn't have, as you're learning and you're eager to like experience life and so many things. And for me, it was more so just an overall speed of how I approach the world. And if there was one thing, I'm not a big regret person. I don't really believe in looking back and saying like I should have done this better. You never know how life would have went, so I don't get caught up in that. But if there was an element where I could say to somebody else something that I wish I had known, similar to a regret, but not necessarily that, is definitely don't compare yourself to who you've told yourself you were for so long and who you see other people being. The only person and the only speed at which you need to go is the speed that you right now in that moment as a free person need. And if you need more space, you need more time, that is completely fine. That is not a lack of success. That is not like a failure. People who go fast and they might be ahead of you right now and they could trip and fall off a cliff right in the next month and next day. So to use that analogy, like you're never behind or ahead of anyone. You're just living your life in the way that you need to and discovering things that you need to. And that would have been a better mentality for me coming home, because I was so hungry to build and do all this stuff that I had been thinking of for so long, that it could have went smoother had I taken a bit more time and been more comfortable with that slow pace. So those are like the things that I think of about what I wish someone would have told me. And honestly, even if somebody would have told me, I don't know if I would have listened. That's the other side to it, right? Like having experienced it, I can see it. And I see people who've come home and have taken their time, and I'm like, I envy that. I respect the hell out of that. People that will just say no, like they're not gonna follow everything. They're not gonna go to everything. They're like, I'm going at my pace. I know what I need. And everyone has to kind of pursue things at their own, abilities and listen to what they think makes sense for them. But it's something I wish more people would heed, is you're not comparing yourself to anybody. You're not competing against anybody. You do this at your speed, at what you need.
One of the things with that too is, when you have a certain level of confidence where you know what your goals are, you know what you want, and you've been told no, especially being in the system, and it's like you're trying to figure out, how can I achieve these goals, and I have to follow the policies and there's rules and stuff, and it's like you're hungry, like you said, you want to do it, and sometimes you violate a policy or one of your probation rules and you don't even realize it, because you're moving so fast and you didn't take the time to really understand what all applied to you, because you're in your own little lane. But I remember when I was publishing, I ran into that problem where I actually was in violation of every single part of the policy when it came to public works and or published works, and I was like, oh great, like I'm trying to go to work release, here I am, and now I could potentially get in trouble. And it's like, well, I'm just gonna go talk to a white shirt that I trust, and I did, and I told him, I was like, hey, I didn't know I violated the policy. And he's like, all right, I'll go talk to the warden. And the warden's like, okay, from now on you have to be within the policy, we're not gonna punish you. And I think it sent a message to a lot of other guys that I was locked up with, that one, we can make mistakes and it will be seen as a mistake, and you're not automatically going to go to the hole and be punished. But I've also seen the other side of that, where somebody does go to the hole, and after they do an investigation, well, then they're let out. But still, but at the same time, what I have listened, when people were telling me to slow down or just wait, be patient, where my whole philosophy was like Nike, just do it. I wanted to be, ahead of myself, so to speak. Maybe not in competition with anybody else, but I felt like I could move faster than what the system was allowing. And that really bothered me a lot. And it was hard for me to really, slow it down, put the reins on. And I got lucky in the fact that, I was able to persist my way forward, get out, and I'm pretty much free to do whatever. We have these conversations, my PO and I, where we joke, and it's like, yeah, I'm on probation or supervision, 4 times out of the year, 4 days out of the year, because I only see her 4 days out of the year for like 10 minutes each time, but I put myself in that position by the choices that I made, and that'll be for another discussion. You know, we'll talk about that. You know, setting yourself up,
Right.
you know, the right way. But yeah, it's good to know that you can kind of put the brakes on when you need to. But at the same time, I would never tell somebody, you know, don't do something that you want to do. Just try to make sure you're doing it the right way. You know, and if you do find yourself in a situation where, like in my situation, I was in a medium prison and I messed up, I violated the policy, I owned up to it, I was not punished for it. However, had I just acted like nothing was wrong, there's a very good chance that I could have went down to work release. Somebody could have found out, hey, Randy published a book. Oh, really? Did he follow the policy? And then they would have looked into it further, and then they potentially could have taken my work release. You know, so it was about preventing future harm, you know, to myself and to others. And, you know, so yeah, that's where we see the growth. You know, it's not that you stumbled or you messed up, it's how did you respond to that? And that's what's important.
It's interesting because I also think about whenever I say that about people going slower, and I think of this and I imagine somebody thinks of it or probably has even asked it, and they say, well, if you didn't take that path and you seem to be doing pretty well, like, isn't that contrary to what you're saying? But everything's odds in life. You're never putting yourself in position to guarantee success or failure. There's never any way you can do that. You can only put yourself in position to make each of those more likely, right? And so, like you said, you're putting yourself in position in the way that you did your time, and that shows in your release. That's one of the common lines is like people talk about, I'm going to get ready when I come home. You're not. Like, whatever you're doing inside, that's going to be exactly what you do when you get out. When you hit freedom, none of that's going to shift because there's going to be a million things coming at you, and you're lying to yourself. You think you're going to suddenly shift. Is it possible? Sure, it's entirely possible, but it's so incredibly unlikely to happen that it's not even worth planning that. And for myself, just because two things. One, let's say I am in a position where I have found a successful path and I've done pretty well for myself, and I did take a journey that was more fast-paced and wasn't in line with the advice that I'm giving. Again, that's the odds. Everyone's different. Everyone's situation is different. I had a place when I came home. I was able to go live with my parents for a little while. I was able to be in school for a little bit. I came home during COVID. COVID was a whole different world entirely. Everything was slower. The whole, you know, there was grace for you not coming to or doing a lot of things. Everybody had second chances and third chances. And so whatever your situation is, the odds are not in your favor for running fast when you come out. It just isn't. It wasn't in my favor. I was lucky to not get caught up in a situation that could have been worse. So I still stand by that advice. But the other side of it is, have I succeeded? I don't know. Like, this is all a continuum. Everything's a continuum. I have no idea what next year holds, what next month holds. Maybe something that I didn't set up myself for well when I first came home is going to come back and bite me in the ass next month. So I don't know what any of that means. So this advice is still very valid despite when you see people that have made it in a different way. Just set yourself up in the best position and play the odds in your favor. So in line with that question, what surprised you most about release? Like, after you came home, what did you experience that you just didn't expect?
I think for me, hands down, is being able to adapt to technology. Like, I think while I was in, I wanted to learn about, you know, smartphones and stuff like that, but they didn't really offer a lot of programs where you could just pick up a phone, you know, legitimately and learn how to use a smartphone. So, you know, I would watch like QVC channels. Sometimes they'd have, you know, they're selling the latest iPhone on there and they're showing you, hey, these are the new apps. You know, when I came in, none of that stuff existed. You know, I had a flip phone and there was no cameras on your phone or any of that stuff. So it's like, coming out, you know, I was fortunate. I had a place to go, and, you know, I had a vehicle, I had a job. You know, I was able to get my old job back, and, you know, so I was able to transition fairly smoothly and not have any real obstacles. And I got permission. I left the state. I went down to Chicago and I did a run, and I remember just navigating. You know, Chicago is so much bigger than Sheboygan, and obviously here we're in Milwaukee and it's bigger than Milwaukee, but you're not quite sure. Like, it's a whole new world. You're just driving. You know, I haven't driven in years, and, you know, obviously decades, and it's like I was never gone.
Yeah.
Like, I just fit right in, and, you know, I was able to go. Like, at first I was carrying cash. You know, I lived a lifestyle before that where cash was king, and you know, you're going into stores and you got $1,000 some in cash, and the people behind you are looking at you like, well, what are you doing? You know, so then it's like, well, I noticed people weren't carrying cash. And so then I obviously adapted, you know, got a credit card, got my debit card, and learned how to use all that stuff appropriately, and, you know, build my credit and stuff like that. And you learn the importance of that and how easy it is compared to, you know, and it's not always easy, because if you've been gone for 20 some years, you have no credit history, you know, so getting your own place can be an issue, you know, because they're going to want to know, what is your credit score? You know, how long have you been working at, you know, the same place? Usually they want you there at least 6 months to a year, you know. But I think a lot of it, and you touched on this, you know, what you're doing now in prison, if you're, and maybe I'm wrong when you said that, but I look at the habits. What habits have you formed? You know, when I was in, I was very disciplined. Most people that know me, they know, you know, I was very disciplined in working out, and I used that as, you know, a way to mentor, you know, my peers and stuff like that, and it was easy to instill confidence in them that way, you know. But when you get out, it's like, how disciplined are you going to continue to be?
Yeah.
And if you weren't very disciplined in there, you know, I remember, you know, I had a cellie one day, and I told him, I was like, man, at least make your bed, you know. And he's like, man, I don't need to make my bed. And so then one day I gave him a little story about the importance of, you know, making your bed, and it wasn't just making your bed, it was forming a habit, you know. And then I told him, you know, here, you can apply that in other things, you know, in school and stuff like that. And so having formed those habits while I was in, and carrying those habits out here, I think is what helped make it easier. It hasn't always been easy, but like I said, I remember being in Chicago, you know, I think there was like 10,000 some other runners down there, and I sent videos and pictures, you know, to my aunt, and she was all concerned. She's like, oh my goodness, what if you get lost? And it's kind of comical now, but yeah, what if? You know, fortunately, I knew how to use my phone and be able to find my way back to where I parked my vehicle, which was actually like almost a mile away, because I made the mistake thinking that it was at Navy Pier. Well, I parked at Navy Pier. Well, then I happened to see somebody running, and then I'm like, hey, are you in the run? They're like, yeah, it's like a mile that way. I'm like, a mile? And it's like, damn, I gotta run a mile before we even do the actual run, you know. But it was kind of cool being able to navigate in real time and have that confidence still to know that I'm not gonna get lost, and not be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah.
You know, and I think a lot of us, especially men, we have a bad habit of not asking for help, thinking, oh, well, it's not manly to ask for help, when it's like, look, it's the human thing to do, to help each other out, you know, and be able to ask somebody else for help when we need it, you know. And for the most part, I haven't had any issues, you know. When I've needed help at work, I mean, that was, like I said, technology. When I first did my job, it was, you know, I did most of the work myself by hand. Now it was more going back to that job and learning how to manage robots and make sure that these robots were doing what I needed them to do. And yeah, I was kind of intimidated at first, you know, seeing the equipment, how it operated, how it moved, and knowing the dangers of, hey, if you mess up, you know, somebody could get injured or lose a life, you know. But again, those habits that I formed while I was in, and that confidence that I instilled, that's what I brought home, and that, I think, is what allowed me to adapt to the technology. You know,
I never made my bed. My reasoning was something that I do now, which is, I was going to get back in the bed later that day, and it didn't make sense to me to make it and then undo it every single day. Now, it wasn't because I was lazy, it was because I genuinely felt like the effort wasn't best use of my time. So I think it still ties in with what you're saying. It wasn't like I didn't make the bed and I had like I had things in line, in order on my desk, like everything else more or less was you know, in place. And I definitely was big on habits. I remember when I was doing my bachelor's degree in business administration, which I always tell people is the most useless degree to get, is that, I mean, I didn't have the options really when I was inside, but basically I was talking to this guy, and he was like, oh man, I got a business plan, blah, blah, blah. He was saying like, do you have something about, do you have a business plan? Or he knew I wanted to get into the nonprofit space. He's like, why don't you want to get into business? And I was explaining to him that, because if you're really trying to get into anything, all of this you're chasing in terms of like your idea isn't even the core thing. Like your habits and your framing are going to be more important, because if you don't have both of those two in place, you can have the greatest idea and something's going to come and knock it all apart, because you haven't had the stability and the emotional intelligence to be able to navigate all the struggles that are going to come from having any kind of a project or a passion. And so that, for me, habits has always been king. It's like that decides the rest of the things that you then blame. You might blame these things for like why your life is where it is, but like underneath all of that is your habits. Like that is how you then structure as best as possible yourself to have more control. And you talk about the tech, like I so many things I can say about tech. I'm always amused when I hear people talk about how they came home and they're like, man, I've been gone so long, I don't know how to use any of this stuff. I'm like, when I was inside, I was reading Entrepreneur Wire magazine, I was reading Wired magazine, I was watching PBS episodes to see what people were using and how, like, I was able to have a really good sense of all the tech even before I came to actually be able to use it. And I would tell friends and family online about, like, did you know about this app? Did you know about this website? Did you know about this new software? They didn't know anything, because I'm like keeping up, even though I don't physically have it. It's creating a structure in my mind about what it looks like, how it operates. I may not know how to use it, but I can explain it. And people that know how to use it can't even explain it. So, like, not saying that I was better, but it gave me at least a way to stay tapped in to what's happening. And all of that, I feel this, I don't really have any evidence of it, but I feel like one of the reasons why it was always so easy for me when I came home to assimilate back into society. I never had the standing in the grocery store, inundated by options and can't move moments. Like, I hear about those a lot. I never had any of that. I was, from the moment I got out, it was like riding a bike. I was no problem. And a big part of that is because I never got comfortable when I was inside, ever. I was a state baby. I smuggled food back from chow hall to eat later because I didn't want to have my people buy me food. I washed my state clothes in the shower because I didn't want to use the laundry because that required more money and I had this limited budget. So, like, I did all of these things to live off the state as much as I could. And and that was uncomfortable. That was never, like, I didn't have like the clean clothes. I didn't have like the food in my locker that I could just go to. I had to like make it make sense every day. And when I came home, because I never got comfortable in there, it was easier for me to maintain my comfort once I came home, because there was no transition of like institutionalization that I had to battle against. And my biggest surprise actually when I came home was how much further ahead of people we are when we come back out. Because folks are so struggling just to navigate daily emotional things and how to get over these things that, like, for me was never a problem. Like, the things that were problems were things that I couldn't wait to have for so long. And it was just the way that I handled things and I navigated things and I looked at things that was so different, and it just stood out so much. Like, okay, I've been gone for a long time, but I can catch up and move past folks pretty quickly once I learn some of the details here in this new world. Because my mentality was different. And I remember always, I use this story, I got out during COVID, and we would be in class, and I got out 3 hours early for class. Like, that's my early release stories. I got out 3 hours early just so I could make it for class from Prairie du Chien. And every class we do this check-in. I never knew what to check. It's all new stuff for me. Like, we want to check in an icebreaker, all this stuff. Closing statement, like all that, that stuff was something that I'm not a fan of it. But basically, we were doing the check-ins, and my entire class, almost, I can't think of anyone that didn't have a different version of it, of how sad or mad or disappointed or depressed they were because of COVID, keeping them from XYZ, and they can't really experience life. And then it would come to me, and I'd always feel terrible because I'm like, I love it. Like, I don't know, this is the best ever. I have no idea what anyone's talking about. The highways are clear. Nobody's at the mall, and they're alone. Like, I wish every day was. I remember one time when COVID started coming, people were getting over COVID. I made a post that said, "Bring COVID back," because like everyone was everywhere. I was like, I want to be the only person again. And yeah, it was just that perspective was so different, and that for me has stood out time and time again in life about how I was massively surprised to meet that reality. And it was a blessing in a sense. Like, to have that in this world is a blessing and a skill and a gift that was again, the most surprising thing for me.
Yeah, I have noticed that, like, and it's kind of funny. So, like, I think I really experienced it, like, when it was like, in the workforce with the jobs, where you have these, everybody pretty much where I work has the same opportunities.
Plug my phone in for charger. Go, keep going.
And they have these opportunities, and they don't take advantage of them. And then they see somebody like me come along, and they're like, you know, you could do this and you could do that. Why don't you do more? And it's like, well, I'm where I want to be right now. And when I want to do something else, then I'll do something else. You know, so I always find it funny that, you know, they're trying to tell me how I need to do things or what I could achieve. So then when I do something more, they're still stuck in the same position. And it's like, how you've been in the same position for years,
Right.
where I've been able to move up pretty fast. Like I pretty much could do whatever I want. And then there's the other part of it where you end up getting a job position where you guys are required to do the same amount of work, the same type of work, and some are able to catch on really quickly.
Yeah.
And then there's others that they struggle, and you try to work with them, and you know, a lot of times you see people calling in all the time because they struggle outside of work or whatever the case may be. And it's like, okay, you know, I think prison really forced me to deal with emotions.
Yeah.
And not always in a healthy way, but because I was, you know, I spent almost a decade in the hole, I was forced to deal with it on my own in there. So fortunately, there were times where I couldn't harm anybody else. But I knew I was so upset at that moment that had I not been confined in that room, I probably would have. You know, it would have escalated and somebody would have said something, and I probably would have done something physically. So forcing myself to just deal with that, you know, and it's like, okay, I had to understand that that's natural. Like, people get upset. What's not acceptable is harming somebody because you're upset. Even if you're not in the wrong, somebody can, you know, make you upset, piss you off, whatever. That doesn't give you a right to harm them. You know, so I dealt with that, and you know, now I see people. Just the other day I was down at the lake and this kid was down there, and it was kind of funny because he's venting, and he reminded me of when I was a kid. You know, and he probably 12, 13 years old, and he's like, oh man, he's like, this guy really pissed me off. I said, well, it's better to be, you know, pissed off than pissed on. And he was just like, he's just like, what? You know, and so he kept walking around in a circle. I was like, are you gonna be all right? And he's like, well, he's like, I'm mad because this guy, I was walking up the stairs juggling my water bottle and it almost hit him, and he said, hey, watch out. He's like, you almost hit me. So he apologized to the guy, and he said the guy started, you know, talking to him and disrespected him, or at least he felt disrespected.
After he apologized?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I said, well, you know, sometimes that's just life, you know. I said, give the guy a pass. You know better, he doesn't. I said, people have a bad day, whatever. So all of a sudden he's like, that's the guy right there. And it's like a 60-year-old guy, you know. He's just